The Sea Peoples are no mystery. In fact, we know exactly who they all are. Look, 1400 BC was one heck of a time. What I mean is right there in 1400 BC, the Second Age began to give birth to the Third Age. We're just going to call this event collectively the Bronze Age Collapse. All right, enough with the autism. Psych, look at this map. You see how these little fires around here was a whole bunch of trouble this entire region around the Mediterranean was experiencing from 1400 BC to about 1150. And who was causing all this trouble? Who was starting all these fires? Well, it was the mysterious Sea Peoples. Who were they? Hold up, I'll just give you the answer real quick. In 1400 BC, not only did the Hebrews come out of bondage from Egypt, but a whole bunch of slaves from a whole bunch of places came out of bondage from where they were. Israel was not the only nation born at the end of the Second Age. Several nations were born. So you had several groups of people that had just been set free from bondage, and they had boats. Where'd they get those boats from? Let's go to the whiteboard. Well, you got your Sea Peoples here, and we know all this right here because the Egyptians recorded it all. Once the slaves were freed from all the kingdoms and all the nations round about the Mediterranean, Egypt had a new enemy that they would come to call the Nine Bows. And after their skirmishes with this band, this confederacy, they came to call all foreign invaders Nine Bows. And they weren't exactly wrong. Here are all the peoples that Egypt listed. The Peliset came from Crete because they were a people in bondage there. The Philistines came out of captivity in Caphtor to come into the Levant, which is this island right here. The Philistines were in captivity to the Mycenaeans, but you see all these fires? They got set free. Just like Egypt got thrown down, the Mycenaeans got thrown down too. And so the Philistines sailed on ships to arrive in the Levant, because that's where they had come from to begin with. Just like Jacob's 12 sons came out of the land of Canaan to go into captivity in Egypt, in 1400 BC when God set them and everyone else around the region free, they went back up to where they came from. So in essence, the Sea Peoples are all the peoples of bondage that the nations had taken, returning to their homelands from whence they had come. This includes the Ethiopians, the Philistines, and the Syrians, or the Armenians, which came out of bondage from Kir. How do you say that word? Back to the board. The Peliset, just one of those groups, were the Philistines. The Jeker, the Shekelesh, the Washesh, the Luka, the Kirkiah, and the Aquesh were Hittites, Etruscans, Minoans, and Mycenaeans. All these fellas whose land is on fire because the slaves all got freed. They band together with these slave groups that got freed to come attack the Egyptians first. That's how we know every bit of this. They wrote it down. Hieroglyphs. So at first it was the Hittites that organized all these fellas into the Nine Bows, which included Hittites. They said, if we can't beat them, let's join them and go down to Egypt, see if we can't beat them. They could not. Who do they think they are? The Egyptians beat the snot out of them and took a whole bunch of them prisoner. And this is where we get to learn who the Denyen are and the Sher Den. You see, the problem with history's tale here, despite what academia says, the Egyptians themselves recorded that a bunch of these fellas that are dressed like and have arrived from the Aegean, which is right up here where Troy is on fire. Bunch of dudes that are dressed like this and have arrived from here are circumcised Hebrews? What? Yes, the Denyen and the Sher Den are the tribe of Dan and Asher, who after coming out of captivity into the Levant, put their boats in the Mediterranean, sailed up this way. Who? Dan and Asher. And their boats were better than all the other boats in the Mediterranean. They got the ships from Dan. And so circumcised Hebrews from the Aegean, yep, they were never in bondage over here. They were in bondage over here. The tribe of Asher was given this coast right here, the promised land. The tribe of Dan was given land in the south, but he couldn't conquer it because they had chariots and he had ships and he didn't trust God at all. So he sailed north and conquered the town of Laish, which was on the Silk Road to China and the hub between that Silk Road and the Mediterranean. And his ships were better than the other fellas that were doing trade from here. Tyre and Sidon. Tyre, sorry. I read these things. I don't listen to somebody tell me about it, so I never know how the words are pronounced. The end. Anyway, it's no mystery at all how Dan and Asher could have gone to the Mediterranean, waxed rich there, and came back looking like Aegeans. That's what happened. Silk Road to China. Laish, which has now been excavated, and it's called Tel, T-E-L, Dan. Tel Dan, the city of Dan, where the tribe of Dan, as the leader of Israel, Israel is 12 tribes, but Solomon married a bunch of pagan wives and led the whole nation, all 12 tribes, into idolatry. 10 tribes were taken from his throne, the throne of David. The northern kingdom, 10 tribes of Israel, separated from the southern kingdom of Judah, which included Benjamin, who had lost their inheritance. Israel in the north, the kingdom of Judah in the south. 2 different nations. The capital was Tel Dan, the city of Dan, where they kept one of the golden calves, having no longer access to Jerusalem, where they were supposed to go down and worship. They set up their own temple in Tel Dan and worshiped the golden calves. Just like after wandering in the wilderness and Moses spent too long on the mountain, the people were like, we need some gods, and so Aaron melted their gold into golden calves so they could worship, and was like, behold, the gods that brought us up out of Egypt. We're not golden calves. What are y'all doing? Moses is up there talking to the dude right now. Anyway, when Moses got back down the mountain, he was so enraged at seeing all this behavior and the giant, sorry to say, orgy that had ensued, that the 2 tablets with the 10 commandments on it that God had written with his own finger out of the rock on top of the mountain, he threw those down and they broke in pieces at the bottom of the mountain. God was like, I'm going to kill them all and start over with you, Moses. And Moses was like, Lord, no, don't do that. Just to give you a little history. The golden calves, one of them was in Tel Dan. Why are they wearing bull horns, and where did the Vikings get that from? Well, these sea peoples are Vikings. They are going Viking, which is a verb, which means to raid, to pillage, plunder, murder, take slaves, take wives. And those Hebrews looked like Aegeans for one reason specifically. They had a very peculiar and new custom. Instead of just thinking themselves superior to everyone everywhere, even people that they conquered, if those people had something that they recognized as like an improvement or something better than what they had, they didn't say to themselves, well, it couldn't possibly be better than what we already have. We're better than them. We beat them. They said, look, that's better, and then they adopted it. So some people could say, like, well, they were colonizers. They had no culture of their own. Yeah, surely they did, but then they adopted all the cultures of all the people round about. And it is peculiar, specifically those that they conquered. Wasn't a situation where, like, they subjugated people they conquered. It was that they colonized them. And I know you might say, well, isn't that the same thing? Yeah, but it's kind of different. Like in America, we don't think of ourselves as subjugated, but we know that we're colonized, but we don't have a king. What we have is an American dream. Hey guys, a melting pot from everywhere. We know how everybody got here. It wasn't all sunshine and roses. Life is not a bowl full of cherries, turns out. But we're all here now. Come on, guys, let's all work together for what? The American dream. Not a king to say, do or else. Ideals that we can all benefit from. Can we though? Is that how it's turning out? Trojan horse. Oh, subtlety is what I'm saying. They use subtlety. Why was Troy on fire? Because the Hebrews in the Aegean, the Danaan, who are recorded in the Iliad as having formulated the plan of the Trojan horse to infiltrate and destroy Troy. Right there, that's why it's on fire. When did that right there happen? Between 1400 and 1150 BC. Is the story true? You bet your bottom it is. True enough, anyway. They have a saying in this region, never trust the Danaan. Because of the Trojan horse, their gifts are poisonous. Promises of grand things, but it turns out to ruin you in the end. Oh, like Satan with Eve in the Garden of Eden, subtlety. They couldn't take Troy by force, they could take it by subtlety. And they adopted for themselves everything they liked from everywhere they did that. The Hittites lost their campaign against Egypt, but then some of those sea peoples came back and burnt down everything on the coast of Egypt 200 miles inland. And then left, turned their attentions north. Dan and Asher both failed to conquer their inheritance, so they mixed in with the people round about. They set out to conquer because of a prophecy they thought they got in Judges 18. They thought God said something he didn't exactly say. It's ironic. God knew they would misunderstand. It's part of the story. God knows the bad guys are going to misunderstand. He uses them in that way. It's easy. Anyway, Dan and Asher took off in their improved vessels that had rigging for their sails, which means that they could sail far longer. The Hittites got thrown down entirely. By who? The Mycenaeans got entirely conquered. By who? Kaway got conquered. By who? The Assyrians got... I'll just tell you. Dan and Asher did not quit being sea peoples when Egypt won that Battle of the Nine Bows or whatever. They kept being sea peoples and conquerors and conquering by subtlety if they couldn't do it by force. Matter of fact, the word Den comes from the word Dan and means the mouth of the river because that's where these fellas would pull their ships into right before they got you. Dan and Asher threw it all down in the Bronze Age collapse. I mean, every single bit of it, not Egypt. Revived the Assyrian Empire, revived the Babylonian Empire, became the Greeks and the Romans, the Germanic tribes and the Danes, the Dan-S, the Aryans, the Indians, the Chinese, Japanese. They did this colonization all throughout the Third Age. And again in the fourth, the serpent, the beast from the sea.